Hi everyone, I hope everybody is keeping well today. Welcome to this webinar, The Recovery Blind Spot, Technology as a Key to Economic Revival. So my name is Loïc Lemarois. I'm a marketing manager at Headspring, and I'll be your host today on this session. This webinar is intended to be interactive. We want to hear from you. So please do send in your comments, your questions by using the question box on the right-hand side of the application. You should have a Q&A icon. We'll have a Q&A session at the end, so we'll make sure to answer as many questions as we can. So today, I would like to introduce Bassem Bana. Bassem is leading the MENA region for Headspring and supporting organizations in their executive learning transformations. Hi, Bassem, how are you today?
Hi, good morning, and thank you, Loïc, and hello, everyone. I want to thank you all for attending this session today. I'll take a few minutes probably to introduce today's topic and also welcome our moderators. For the ones who don't know us, Headspring is a joint venture between the Financial Times and IE Business School. We are basically founded on the principle that executive developments need to be collaborative, relevant, and most importantly, measurable. Combining the academic excellence of IE Business School with the award-winning journalism of the Financial Times, we're currently providing organizations with a future-focused kind of solutions based on the fast-paced development that are currently happening in markets and shaping eventually our economies. In today's session and part of the learning journeys that we have, we've prepared for you this topic and to discuss basically why technology and human activity need to run at the same pace in order for economies to recover. As you may notice now, and as we emerge gradually from lockdowns, leaders currently are considering how to return their organization to full speed and recovery in really unstable environment. However, with the full focus on the technology part, it's crucial for us not to miss on the human aspect and the role that people and talent basically play in hand-holding this information in organization. In today's session, we will discuss what we'd like to call the recovery blind spot. Basically, we'll highlight the challenges that organizations or you basically might be able to find in the process. Also, by the end of the session, we will share with you our recommendation on a learning program that will probably a deep dive into more details to support your leaders. Joining us today from Dubai, Dr. Sami Haroon, technology and policy expert and one of our global educators in Headspring. He's also the director of research and strategy at the Dubai Future Foundation. Thanks for joining us, Doctor.
Thank you.
Also, from Frankfurt by Ms. Claire Jones, FT journalist covering the global economy and writes about the intersection of economics, politics, and markets. Thanks for joining us, Claire. Finally, before we start, I encourage you really to ask as much questions as possible in the chat and also share your feedback with us by the end of the session. We welcome you again and hope you enjoy the session. Now I hand over to Dr. Sami to kick off the session.
Thank you, Bassem. It's good to be back with you and with Headspring. I'm delighted to be able to join with you to share with you some of my insights on the role of technology in helping us recover with faster growth and higher employment rates, both in the MENA and around the world. The reason why we chose to focus the session on technology is that there is a big emphasis on recovery funds, on financial economic stimulus from governments, pouring money, injecting money, cash into the economy, yet with less structured focus on where such investment should go to. And there's this feeling that technology is not getting the right recognition in the overall schemes of of government policies. So I want to start my talk from rather a remote part of the world. Do you now see my screen?
We see
From
that
Siberia. Yeah, you can see that. Okay, and I'm gonna switch off my camera. That way I can focus more on the slides than seeing myself. Okay. So I don't know how many of you are gamers, but there's a very popular mobile phone game in the US, especially among middle-aged women, called The Secret Society. This game was developed by two brothers, twin brothers, Alexander and Afanasy Ushnisky, in the very remote little town of Yakutsk in the northeast of Siberia in Russia. The two twins, in fact, come from a little village outside Yakutsk. Yakutsk itself is around 250,000 inhabitants, and it's around 250 miles away from the Arctic Circle. So it's one of the most remote inhabited areas in Russia. It's around 7 hours away from Moscow, and it was until not long time ago notoriously known for having an expensive and bad internet connection. It is difficult to reach, and it has a very long and harsh winter. So it's not exactly your ideal place to start up a company that would end up to become a big success, generating around 9 to 10 million US dollars in sales on an annual basis. Yet these two young twin brothers who come from the local ethnic group in the Sakha Republic in Russia have managed just to do that. Okay, so they set up a company called Mytuna. Do you still see my slides, or is this in your face? Okay, so Mytuna is a company that was set up in 2012, and it was founded by the twin brothers after a series of experimentation with developing computer games. The twin brothers first got exposed to game development literature at the local library. They borrowed 3,000 rubles from their dad to buy a computer, and they started working on developing also. They developed around 14 different games until they really managed to have their hit game, The Secret Society, and they managed then to attract the interest of foreign investors in Sweden, in Israel, in the US, and elsewhere. It then helped them to transform their game, their company, into one of the major successful companies in Russia, but also, of course, in Siberia. Now, despite all that success, the twin brothers continue to live in their local hometown, and they have no plans to go anywhere. Another story that also drew my attention my attention to exceptional, difficult to explain instances of success that go completely against what economic geography usually tell us about the factors that contribute to technology success. Is the case of Zafar Khan. Zafar Khan used to be based in Silicon Valley and in LA for a long period of time, working in the IT sector. When he decided to set up an algorithm-based company that helps track movement on the internet to segment users into different market segments and then sell advertisement to different companies that have an interest in targeting these different segments. And he set up a company called Sovizar, but before he did that, he wanted to initially to set it up in the US, where the market is and where he knows people, where all his business networks are. only to find out that it was going to cost him so much money and he would have to borrow a lot of money to set up his company. So what he did, then he decided to move back to Lahore in Pakistan. He's originally from Pakistan, but not from Lahore. And he set up his company he set up Sofizar in Lahore from his own pocket. He did not need to get any investment in it. And in case you wonder where Lahore is in Pakistan, it's in the northeast again. And he said that from that perspective, it was the best decision ever. He was able to launch the business successfully, sell his services in the US while he's based in Lahore, paying cheaper wages and having absolutely no barriers to market entry, because he did not have to use road, airport, or port to transport anything. The Pakistani bureaucracy did not stop him or was not a hinder for the growth of his company. He invested in a power generator and good service and good internet connection, and he was ready to fly. So this is another multi-million-dollar company, and it's one of many examples now of successful technology companies based out of Lahore. And the reason I'm sharing these two stories with you is that indeed technology has enabled many businesses around the world to reach out consumers whom otherwise they wouldn't have been able to reach. Using the App Store, the Play Store from Google, Mytuna was able to directly sell its games to American consumers. So based in Russia, was presented absolutely no barrier to their ability to grow globally. They had to just appeal to the taste and interest of foreign potential customers. They did that brilliantly. Of course, they traveled, they attended conferences, they went to expos, but they remained based in their hometown, and using technology, they were able to grow. Now, on the other side, on the user side, the American or European or Eastern gamer was also able to enjoy the utility, the entertainment, the fun that come with playing that game without having to necessarily to find that game in the local store. So the digital platform, the digital store that was made available by Apple, by Google, and by other digital platform companies like Amazon and others, had brought the producer and the consumer in direct touch with each other, much closer, and that amplified the opportunity for creativity, for entrepreneurship, and for consumption. And we see that also in more recent data that, in fact, found that 70% of service exports in India are actually are digital products, basically, and that 81% of these are delivered over the net. So they are delivered with no physical transaction or friction taking place. This represents a great opportunity for small companies, for SMEs, to internationalize, to reach beyond their local markets, purchasing power capacity, but also to source critical inputs into their businesses. They could work with advertisement companies, with designers, with marketeers from around the world to support their business operations, even when they are present in a very remote place. So this has led to increase in the export of services, which do not always or are not always captured properly in trade data. So they are mostly underrepresented in global trade data, but which in reality represent a much share of the exports increasingly from many developing countries. So the economic geography literature, when we try to summarize when we try to summarize it, usually identify between 15 to 16 factors as being critical for any place, for any city, town, or region, for businesses present in these in such locations, that they need these different factors to enable them to succeed internationally. And if we look at these 16 factors, we find that technology had managed in many ways to override these factors, to compensate for the lack across different geographies, cities, places. And today we hear a lot of talk about people increasingly after the COVID or during the COVID experience deciding or thinking of moving out of cities and into peripheral regions, because they found out that they could still they will still be able to participate in economic life, to be productive, using internet tools, digital tools, other technologies as well, to enable them to do that without necessarily having to pay high rents in downtown areas or having to worry about the commute. And this explains from a different angle, perhaps, why successive technological waves have led to an increase of economic prosperity, historically speaking, and across the world. So on the left-hand side, you see the GDP per capita in dollars, and down you see the different technological waves over the last 500 years or so. And the reason for that is that with every technology, with every new technology, with every new technological wave, human beings, both being producers and consumers, had seen their capacity, their agency, what sociologists and economists sometimes call agency, enhanced, increased, and expanded. We can now fly, we can ride on high-speed trains, we can see each other over distances, we can use such platforms like now to interact and connect and give lectures and seminars over distance, and that increased dramatically the opportunity for consuming services and goods, and also for producing them. And so the technology has become a very critical factor in that, something to add to price and income as important factors in deciding on what we are able to do and what not. Just having lots of money in your bank, but not being able to use a smartphone for instance would work against you, okay? Because you would be denied access to a whole host of services and goods. Okay, so whenever we decide to consume a good or a service, then we usually have a number of technology options to do that, assuming that it's not within a walking distance. But even that case, at some point you will be in interaction with technology. You can take a car, take a train, you can phone, you can get on the net in order to buy something. And while we take these things for granted, it's not true that everyone has access to a car or to a phone or live nearby a train service, and that has an impact on our ability to consume, but also to produce and to participate in economic life. It's well known that the mall, for instance, was created by the car. Without cars, we wouldn't have had malls. We would have had maybe some department stores in cities, but not big, large-scale malls outside cities, which was a spin-off of the introduction of the car, and then hence the growth of the suburbs, and then which led to the malls. So technology itself has become a resource that helps you unlock other resources. Okay, the smartphone is a very big and a very good example of that. 20 years ago, I did lose a phone in Austria, in Vienna, and all I had to do is go back and find my missing book of contacts. Last year, I lost a phone in Brussels, and I became almost paralyzed. I didn't know what to do anymore, where to go. Not to access any of my apps would allow me to book hotel, take an Uber, use my phone to pay. So to communicate with the people I was meant to meet with. So it represented a huge barrier to my agency, to my human agency. And so I was become very ineffective, and that when amplified at the city level or at an economy level or at a business company level, that would lead to similar effects. So the less technology equipped a company is, a business is, an organization is, and then you can scale it a city or a country, the less it is able to create economic wealth and to grow. Mobile telephony represents an increasingly significant share of many countries' GDPs. Globally, it's around $4 trillion. It could be even more than that if we manage to capture trade and services properly. A lot of industries today wouldn't exist. A lot of companies wouldn't exist without the smartphone, for instance. So the smartphone is a major enabler of human choice. We could use it to consume, and because it vastly increases the access to consumers, it vastly increases the opportunity for businesses to grow and to service these consumers. The problem is that, and this is why technology is important, the role of technology in recovery is a blind spot, is that we tend to assume that that technology is widespread. Well, it's not. Even old ones like the cars, airplanes, train travel, they're still, globally speaking, they are still in the minority. Minority of people actually do ever fly. Not majority of people around the world still don't own their own cars. And train travel is probably a European thing still. It's not a well-spread technology that help connect peripheral regions to major economic activity and vice versa. So in this respect, technology, until it's addressed properly and invested in, can be a driver not of economic growth, but also economic inequality. So those who have, this comes from the Economic and Social Commission, the UN Economic and Social Commission for the Asia Pacific region, and you could see that there is a good positive relationship between income and subscription to the and broadband subscription, without which you would not be able to watch Netflix, for instance, or play a game online, or enroll in a class that required some video streaming. In the region, we see the same thing. Internet users and GDP per capita are positively correlated. The higher the GDP, the higher the number of internet, the share of internet users in the population. So addressing the technology problem, for instance, through the recovery funds, and structuring these funds to address shortcomings, gaps, deficits in access to technology, in technology adoption, is in fact a critical policy matter, but also at the business level, businesses need to be aware of that, but also they are increasingly, in fact, aware of that, and they need support, especially SMEs. This is an example, for instance, from the use of e-payments, plastic cards, where only 3% of households in India have access to plastic cards and e-payments, as opposed to Japan and the US, where it's 68%, if not more. You can only imagine the severity of the situation now, with when entire populations went into a lockdown, for instance, not being able to order things online, to use your phone to get groceries delivered to you, all sorts of services. You could imagine, without access to technology, how much of a disadvantage you're put as a consumer, but also from a business perspective, as a provider of service, as a producer of goods, you lost access to a huge potential untapped market just because of the lack of technology. So this was also something that was amplified in the COVID-19 crisis that affected all of us, where companies realized that, yes, they have automated all their, 90% or so in some cases of their production processes, but they still could not keep their factories open because the demand got a big hit. Consumers were not able to put enough demand, adequate demand for their the services and for their products. And so there were, we kind of, it was the eureka moment where we noticed that we're not as ready on the demand side to continue to be participating in market activity, even if the factories are automated, even if we did not need people to be there to produce these things. We still needed, people needed to be able to reach reach and access these products and services, and they were not able to do so. This is also confirmed by data from McKinsey, the trend, the rapid trend to shift into digital platforms, businesses making their products and business and services available to consumers over various digital tools and platforms, channels, and that from education and telehealth to grocery shopping and banking. In fact, yesterday, just as it happened, I was talking to someone from HSBC, the global bank, and he said they had a target to convert their consumers who haven't converted yet from physical to digital services. They had 2020 as the target. They had a certain target to do so. They reached that target in 2 weeks only. In the month of March, they didn't even have to nudge anyone. People shifted completely to digital platforms, which now allows the banks to make huge savings on cutting down on the number of branches they have around, and obviously on the number of people who they needed to staff these branches. So technology is driving recovery, and it will continue to drive growth. Service providers are now quickly investing in technology, jumping on technology platforms, producers, workers in order for them to keep jobs and even start new jobs. Now people are starting new jobs remotely, and consumers who have began to adapt quickly to adopting alternative digital technology-enabled tools and communication channels in order to help them consume certain products and services. Now, as I said, this applies easily on most of advanced economies, less so in the developing world, in the MENA region. Okay, so this data is from the US. It kind of mirrors what I just said, but it gives you an idea about established user versus new user. When it comes to grocery, you see a lot that this business has gained a lot of digital users, if you wish, new customers using the new channel to put in an order to consume. In the Middle East, the realization of the importance of digital platforms and technology to reach out across the deserts of the Middle East and across countries and to help them cross border more smoothly. We've seen big investments in digital platforms. Some of them are made by known international brands, others by new local brands who have begun to invest heavily in the infrastructure required to expand the market and the reach. So this is just to give you an idea about about what's going on, the trend. So established of traditional offline brands moving online, and then the launching of online only brands, or enabling that trade, especially through digital platform markets. So it's and the delivery companies to enable the matching between the supply and demand. In the MENA region, the trend is there, mostly in the GCC countries. It's less so outside the GCC. There is a clear recognition, though, that without investing in technology, especially digital technology, but also automation in some industries, the MENA regions which face very tough and stiff competition from global players who are entering the region with more capital, with better technology, and with a very large global market share. So it's no longer a matter of looking nice and modern and sophisticated. It's really a matter of sustainability and survival. As I showed earlier in the beginning of this presentation, isolated, very small startups in Southeast Russia or in Lahore or elsewhere in the world were able to capitalize on the use of technology and technology platforms to build very strong brands, global brands, and access international markets, reduce entry costs. And Middle Eastern firms, some of them have done that successfully within the region, but they haven't done so yet to grow globally. This shows, for instance, e-commerce in retail, the consumer penetration in this segment. And we see that in the developed world, for instance, the UK has a rate of 15% of market penetration, as opposed to UAE that has 4.2, for instance, which is the top in the region. So there's still a lot of room to grow, which is good news. And but that would require a lot of investment. Just to kind of put a logical structure around the message I try to carry throughout this presentation, that technology enables human agency, which is critical both in consumption and production. So human agency is basically the delivery on your choice. So you want to consume something, technology enables it. Without technology, without the smartphone or e-payment technology, it's very unlikely that you'll be able to consume a whole range of products and services. The same thing applies on businesses who want to produce things, okay? Who want to continue keeping their labor engaged, who want to continue be able to source the talent they require. We have companies like Facebook now accepting that some of their staff will continue permanently to work from home remotely, and they're discussing different financial packages for them. The assumption is that if you don't need to live in downtown San Francisco, you can live cheaply in a town far away. Then you should afford to get a smaller salary. So in a way, we'll split the saving. You pay less in rent or in property, and we split the saving, and we have to pay you less. The same thing with creativity, with entrepreneurship, the importance of technology to enable human agency there. So it enables us as businesses to continue operating, but also to continue reaching our customers and to expand the customer base globally. When it comes to creativity, that can be any economic activity from developing games to writing IT softwares to teaching music. Or learning music on the consumption side. My kids do that. It happens over technology platforms. So, entrepreneurially speaking, I've already given you a few examples of how technology is and has been enabling entrepreneurs to operate at a global level, and how without it we would have never seen successes and economic growth examples popping up in very unlikely places like Yakutsk or even Lahore, for that matter. In Yakutsk, I think Mytona has over 400 people working for them, which is a very big number for a small place like that. I think I'm gonna end with this very quick summary. So businesses need to develop their growth-oriented technology strategies. Technology should be an integral part of their growth strategy, in fact, and not something that they do in small patches and in piecemeals, or in a Me Too fashion, just because other companies are adopting it. You need to integrate the one within your strategy. It should not just be seen as a way to automate work, but it's a way to empower workers, to enable them to work in a more flexible way and more productive way, to enable your suppliers to be able to serve you better, and of course also to enable your customers to interact with you in a more profitable and productive way for both of them, for both parties. So it's a systemic undertaking. It cannot be done in bits and pieces. It needs to be done in a strategic way, in a well studied and organized and in a well managed way. Because failing to do so, it's also an expensive investment. You can end up spending millions of euros or dollars and dirhams on technology investments in a business only to see no return on investment or to make things worse than what they used to be before making that investment. This is all I had to share with you for the time being. I think I did it within time. Not sure, Bassem, whether
yeah, that's good.
I
Thank
went
you.
beyond time. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think we're good with time. Thank you very much. It was very helpful. We have a few questions, but we'll keep them until the end before moving now to Claire and her segment.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Sami. That was a very, very interesting talk. And I think the key lesson I took from that really was just the degree to which the technology can break down borders. I mean, hearing about this town in the middle of nowhere in Siberia that's managed to develop this business, which has got quite impressive figures on revenues and has real global reach in terms of the people it sells the product to and the people who consume the product, is incredible. So I think this is a great lesson to take away, that the power of technology is the power to create global networks and global reach. My issue with that would be, where does that leave trust? So just to step back a little bit, how do we trust? And I think one of the ways in which we trust is through our senses. And my concern would be, how do businesses replicate that sensory experience that you get from going into a physical store when you're dealing with the online experience? So a case study would be John Smedley. John Smedley makes some very nice jumpers and other woolen products. It's a UK firm. Most of their sales are now online. Now, does that mean they should close their flagship store in the West End? Not necessarily. And I think the reason is that the reason why those online sales are so strong is because people trust the brand, because they've been into the physical store, they've seen the quality of the product, they've seen the vibrancy of the color, they've felt how it is on their skin, and they'll go back for more. So I don't think you can entirely replicate that process of trust in the same way that you can with a kind of physical store. However, I do think a digital presence can be made very evocative. I like the lessons you drew from the experience that we have with our phone. And our phone is just, you talk about this great experience. You were in Vienna 20 years ago, you lose your phone, it's, oh, well, okay, move on, you've lost your contacts, okay. When you lose it years later in Belgium, it's a totally different experience. It almost feels as though a part of you is gone. People are looking at this thing constantly. So it does become a device by which people can have very evocative responses. So through the use of pictures, through the use of sound, through the use of written material, there's a lot that brands can do online to build that sense of trust. However, there's another issue where they build that sense of trust, but on occasion we've seen it being broken. Now, there was a very good article in the Financial Times the other week talking about how Amazon's #1 reviewer in the UK is a guy who will buy the product, he'll review it on Amazon, give it 5 stars, and then he'll go onto eBay and flog the item for more than he bought it for on Amazon. So he's basically pocketing the gains of this trust that people have in online systems. There was another example of this a few years ago. There's a journalist in the UK called Uber Butler. He decided to open a restaurant in London in his garden shed, which he called The Shed. Now, through the restaurant didn't exist, but through manipulation of the rankings, it managed to become the #1 restaurant in the whole of London on TripAdvisor for a matter of a few weeks. And so you've got this issue, I think, where, okay, you can have the global reach, but you're lacking the community knowledge. So this is something that brands really, really need to consider, is how they replicate that and how they police that. Now, this is something that can exist in the non-online, in the real world as well. We've got the George Akerlof paper that talks about the market for lemons, where the example that he uses in this very famous economics paper is the sale of second-hand cars, and says the second-hand car dealer always knows more than the buyer. So you often get these information asymmetries between the consumer and the business. However, in that instance, if the car's a dud, there's some recourse, you can take it back. Now, you can do that to an extent with Amazon. Can you do that if you buy an app and it's got a good rating on the App Store? Can you actually give it back? Can you recoup? Some do, but some don't. I think so there's an issue in terms of like, how do you police? How do you build trust? And I think this is part of a broader issue. If we can get away and ahead of ourselves, just because technology is so impressive in breaking down borders, we can forget the importance of local, community, human practices. And I think there's been some examples of IT projects, government IT projects, on which billions has been spent that have gone very wrong. Now, one we talked about in preparing for this presentation was the Phoenix Pay scandal. So the Phoenix Pay system came out in 2016 in Canada. It was the Canadian government's attempt to centralize paying civil servants in Canada. It was a massive project. They thought they could centralize pay, that this would cut costs, that it would streamline everything. It went totally and utterly wrong. They spent a lot of money on it. The result was that it didn't work. Civil servants didn't get paid for months on end. And in the end, they had to resort back to the local practices. A similar thing happened in the UK with the National Health Service. They had a £10 billion IT project that was a disaster. Again, the mistake was to try and centralize everything and just forgetting the importance of local practices. So I think a lesson for me is that, okay, you can break down borders, but you really have to look at, why have these local practices existed in the first place? If you're a bank, you can't just introduce the same sort of online service in every single different country in the world, because countries have a very different way of looking at money. People within those countries have their own preferences about the form of payments they like to make. In Germany, for instance, in a lot of ways, it's a very, very advanced economy, but people like to pay with cash. So and there's also privacy concerns. So as a bank, you're going to have a totally different online offering in Germany to the one that you have in the UK if you're going to be successful with that approach. So even though technology can be great in breaking down borders, there are limits to it in the sense that you do have to think about the local practice too. So I think there's a way, I mean, of course there's ways to do that, but I think it's just an important lesson for companies. Really draw on the local knowledge. Don't forget the human experience, not only on the consumer side, but on the business side too. In terms of rebuilding trust that can be shattered, I think there are examples of how you can do it online and how you can create online ecosystems. An example is this urban sitter babysitting app that exists in the US. Now, people are clearly very, very sensitive about, who they leave their children with, but this app has managed to come up with a very good way of building an ecosystem, running background checks on the parents, running background checks on the babysitters, that involves checking criminal records, that involves building up a reference database, to really create a system that people trust. Now, of course, that is going to limit your size. I mean, it's hard to create trust on an industrial scale, on a global scale, but I think it is something that is too often forgotten and should be remembered a little bit more when people are really talking about, taking advantage of reaping the rewards of technology. A second lesson would be just really, really focus on drawing on the human expertise at the local level. I think less a lesson, but a third thing that you pointed out, which I think is worth drawing a little more on, Sammy, is where this leaves the issue of inequality. And I think there's a few points on this, is that, you know, in some ways it's great that you can have someone go from Silicon Valley to Lahore or Siberia, in areas which are not the richest parts of the world, and produce a lot for their local economies by doing this. However, I think you could also exacerbate inequalities, like you say, because all of this is reliant on having a very, very good internet connection. And if you look at the example of Germany again, where the fiber optic networks are strong is in very rich parts of Western Germany, in places like Bavaria, where the private sector will know there is a market that will pay a premium for very good internet service. So that's an example of how you exacerbate inequality between these like very rich areas of Germany and very poor areas. And what this leaves me thinking is that we do need to start looking at wireless connectivity as a public good. It's like phone lines were in the 20th century, or like the Universal Postal Service was before that. States have to play a much bigger role here in ensuring that everyone has access to very good internet provision and very good wireless connectivity. This is not only for moral reasons of inequality, but it also makes economic sense too, because people are not only producers, but the consumers. And as you pointed out excellently, the consumption is really very, very much linked to the technology that backs it up. So, and I'd also say, just to draw on the recent experience with COVID, one final point would be that, okay, this breaks down borders, it breaks down barriers, but where does this leave workers? Do we end up in a scenario where people export labor to other countries that don't have as good regulations? Okay, there are plus sides for workers. We can move from San Francisco in a tiny apartment to a massive house in Lake Tahoe. That's great, but I think there are also other questions that have to be addressed in terms of the legal rights of workers, given that we have seen this like massive change, more or less overnight, in how people are working. Yeah, I think that's it for us. So I'll wrap up now. Thank you.
That's a great observation, Claire. Thank you so much. And for Sammy as well, drawing on lots of these examples and the case studies from Claire, not only from the Middle East and Africa region, but also from around the world. Some questions comes in mind in terms of this move and shift towards technology as the savior, you know, in the last few months that we saw. And you would see some different parts of the world, they were like taking that, you know, gradually. However, they faced this kind of situation and they rushed into it to save their, you know, supply chain, to maintain their customer base and so on. And they introduced lots of these technologies from investments or from tools and so on. However, how this has impacted people, because at the end of the day, people need to use these technologies in order to deliver. And in order to perform. From your experiences, how this is like affected, you know, the people or the employees in the organization, and maybe where are the gaps probably that organization need to look at in order for them to make sure that there is a balance between the technology part, but also the human factor part that enables the technology, like Dr. Sammy mentioned.
Is this question to me or?
Yeah, both of you.
Go ahead.
Give your takes on it.
I think there's no question about it. I think this pandemic for a lot of people has been more bearable because of technology. It's made it possible for me to do a lot of my job from home. And there is this issue where there is this inequality where a lot of people haven't been as fortunate as me, but I think it has meant that people can get some education, that people can do some work, and also that people can stay connected with their colleagues. Now, I think what's interesting is just, I think people think about the product and less about the relationships that back it up. And that's my sense from working in a company where a lot is on creativity. there's the issue where, okay, you can produce the article using the technology, but a lot of the ideas and processes that go into making the articles is based on human relationships and interactions. Now, of course, you can get around this issue with Zoom calls, and I think Zoom calls with colleagues have really helped a lot, but not all colleagues like Zoom calls. So there is a sense in which I would be concerned as well about what do we do when new people are joining the company? How do we integrate them into the workforce? Do you have some sort of guidelines about, you know, do you need to have like one Zoom call a week? Do you still need to have a sort of like, you know, an office to almost be a sort of like as coffee houses used to be in the city of London, places where people come to just, you know, have meetings every now and again. So I think there are limits to what you can do with technology, but it's definitely made it a lot more bearable in terms of the pandemic, would be my sense.
That's great.
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I think it can be answered at multiple levels. I think in industries where indeed you could not work from home, I think there will be a bigger push towards complete automation. So you would see an elimination or a minimalization of the role of humans because of the COVID experience. But in industries and professions where you could still work remotely over technology, platforms or using technologies, I think what you would see, and we already did, is a modification and design of the technology to better suit work practices. We've seen companies like Zoom, but also Teams, continuously upgrading and adjusting their technology so that it serves us better. So technology companies, producers are also learning now as we are learning. And of course, companies need to adjust and to organize workers differently. Claire talked about the issue of trust. I think this is going to be even more critical and important for businesses now when entire teams are working remotely. You can only imagine when someone is starting a new job remotely, like, how do you really develop that that rapport that is usually required or essential in building this trust between individuals working in one team or across teams. So it would have an impact, yeah? But it's I mean, the way I think about sometimes it's like other technology is there to aid people, or people are introduced to aid the technology, and I think we're going to see a lot of that happening going forward, like in a way to redesign our jobs, the way we operate, and also to redesign technology.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's really crucial, and for us as an organization as well, tracking what's currently happening in the market and trying really hard to, you know, be there for our partners, for organizations. We found out that there is basically a few you know, subjects that organizations need to look at, you know, from the last 6 months, for example, and the rush towards the technology. There is clear need towards understanding really what are the technology trends that are available out there and how these are you know, managed to support the organization in that situation as soon as possible. And second, they start looking as well to the investment in terms of how we can able to put the investment in technology in order for us to be immune for such a disruption and be ready for something like that that might come in the future. And I'm sure probably we're already experiencing this from, you know, the next lockdown that we're going to and the spikes in terms of economies and how people are reacting. And also one part that are, you know, is important is basically how these investment and the digital trends are reflecting internally on employees, because you have different generations, like Claire mentioned, in terms of quality and different, you know, people that are working on different level, how they're taking this technology and how they would able to really contribute to that supply chain to make sure that the customer excellence is always there. And the final one is basically for leaders to really relook their digital transformation strategy and accelerate that to the maximum impact. So for that, we're putting lots of work on that. I want to share something with the audience as well in terms of some of the journeys that we basically designed, and basically start with a different lab, similar like the one that we're having now, but it's much more detailed and customized toward the organization. And as you can see at the first level, we discuss about, the digital trends, like I mentioned, how COVID-19 impacted the organization and what, had happened, how people reacted to it, how the company reacted to it, and also in terms of what would be the investment that needs to be done in the organization in order to facilitate the supply and demand chain and make sure that the customer excellence is at its best. Also, we look at people and technology, similar to what was mentioned briefly today about that people are really behind everything and they are the enabler of everything that may happen in that situation. And the last one is basically driven towards two parts, which is one is for basically the leaders in the organization, where they look into redesigning their strategy and reimagining their strategy, looking into the different application of technology from cybersecurity and so forth. And also for managers who need something as a hands-on, which we implement a hackathon for them to work on some ideas, breakthrough ideas, support them in delivering that. This is basically the latest that we're currently developing on that, and it's basically customized and be done in a different journeys. I'm gonna pause for now and see if Loic have any questions or would like to end this session. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone, for this great session. Actually, on this note, Bassem, I'm going to run a quick poll to see if actually people are interested in knowing more about Headspring digital programs. So just answer yes or no if you're interested in hearing more about what we have to offer. So in the meantime, while the poll is running, actually I do have a question. So most of the people that are attending the webinar today are from the HR and L&D, I'll say kind of job title. So my question is, what is your view of the impact of technology on education? So I think it ties in with what kind of Bassem just mentioned here. So I'd like to know exactly your views there. I don't know if Claire or Sammy wants to start.
Yeah, sure. Or Sammy, do you want to take this?
Sorry, are you asking the poll question? Can you repeat the question, please?
No. So the question is, what is your view of the impact of technology on education?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, it's I guess it's in many ways it's pretty obvious now that almost all education institutions have developed digital alternatives channels. So they all have a digital offering, online offering. Before it used to be something that only few education organizations that were interested in it or develop expertise and competency in it. Now all schools, from Ivy Leagues to ordinary ones, have jumped on the digital wagon, which means that even people like me, I have to get used to how to deliver things over a screen. It's still very, very challenging. Organizing group work, curricula, interacting with students, so all of that have changed. But it's also for my kids who go to at level at grade 5 and 8. There too, they're trying to figure out how to work, how to study online. The teachers had to learn how to do it, and in a relatively very short period of time. And then choosing the technology platform, which one to go with, privacy, security, trust that we talked about. So it's transforming it, I would say.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm going to ask one last question because we're a bit behind time. So we talked a lot about the importance of technology for recovery, but is there any resistance out there for a digital world?
Yeah, I think there's an awful lot of resistance out there actually. And to kind of flip it around, there's also a lot of like resistance to the non-digital world building digitally as well. I mean, I think you've seen an increase in a lot of like membership of online groups and a lot of sort of conspiracy theories spreading very quickly throughout the pandemic too. So yeah, I think there are a lot of concerns. I mean, certainly to draw on the German experience again, privacy is a massive one. Privacy and trust are massive issues, and you know, we've all got these like corona warn apps on our phones, so people have embraced digital as a way to fight the pandemic a little bit, but not everyone is comfortable with it by any means. Lots of people see it as very invasive.
Mm-hmm.
And how does actually leaders or even governments kind of, you know, tackle that problem?
It's a good question.
It varies, I guess. No, it varies from one country to another as well. How it's managed, and also culturally, how people are, how accepting people are of moving on using technology as a mean to conducting otherwise life as usual, no? From education to grocery shopping to doing your work.
I think mostly as well reflects on the generations. Like, for example, millennials, generations that, you know, they jump on the technologies quite quickly, and they're probably more, you know, receptive to any of the applications that are out there, regardless of the cybersecurity or privacy in that. And we were seeing this everywhere. But I think in terms of some of the resistance is probably because of people really need to have some sort of the human interaction and the social aspect out of it, and that probably reflects on the other question that was asked to Sami around how technology is impacting education. And in my opinion, I think regardless of everybody's moving online and perfecting, you know, the online delivery, it's all related to a specific impact that you can deliver from that interaction, and there is going to be a limit to that kind of medium of interaction and impact. But it should have some sort of a blend between the social aspect, where you bring people in to share the experiences, to experience something together, and the best of practices can be done, you know, in an online format. So I think the resistance either from, you know, people demanding more of a, you know, social kind of connection and bringing back at least this kind of interaction. And others who adapted quickly, which are generations which are, you know, moving across and driving transformation.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, it will have also ramifications on the infrastructure itself. Do you still need big campuses? How do you organize classrooms? You know, it's really transformative. It will change a lot going forward.
No, I agree. I think those are actually like great points. I'm just looking at the time, and I want to, you know, kind of make people free and start their day. So thank you very much, Claire, Sami, Bassem, for joining the session today. It was very interesting, and there's so many things I can relate to. So thank you very much. It was very insightful. I'd like to thank everybody who joined the session today. I hope you found it interesting. Please make sure to visit our website, because we do run webinars quite often on a regular weekly basis. So please do check in on what is the next session. And again, Claire, Sami, Bassem, thank you very much for joining today.
Thank you.
I wish you all
a great day.
Thanks, Doctor.
Thanks, Claire.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.